Something happened to me that I still can't explain. And no matter how many times I tell myself it wasn't real, I know it was. There are things in this world that don't follow the rules we were taught. And sometimes they find us. Come on in. Get comfortable if you are lying in bed right now or sitting somewhere dark with your headphones in. Good. Tonight I have 3 stories for you. Real experiences. The kind that don't leave you after you've heard them. The kind that settle in slowly like cold air under a door. These aren't meant to make you scream. They're quieter than that. Slower, the kind that sit at the back of your mind on a still night and whisper, "What if?" So pull the blanket up and let me begin. Story 1. The apartment on Reed Street. I moved into apartment 4C on a Tuesday in October. It was the kind of move that happens fast. Too fast. Looking back, my previous place had fallen through in a way that wasn't entirely my fault, and I needed somewhere quick. The listing for Reed Street had been up for less than 24 hours. The price was reasonable. The photos looked fine. The landlord answered his phone on the second ring. I should have asked why it had been available in the first place, but I didn't. I signed the lease digitally, transferred the deposit, and by Tuesday evening I was standing in an empty apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smelled faintly of old paint and something else I couldn't name, something just slightly sweet. The way a closed room smells after no one has been in it for a long time. The apartment itself was fine. That is the honest truth. Objectively, it was fine. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a bathroom with decent water pressure, and a living room with a single window that looked out onto the street below. Mostly older buildings, a laundromat on the corner, a deli 2 blocks down that I would later learn closed at 9 sharp every night. No exceptions, the owner once told me. "We close at 9, he said, and left it at that. I didn't think anything of it then. My first week was ordinary. I unpacked slowly, the way you do when you are not entirely sure how long you are going to stay somewhere. A few boxes remained unopened in the corner of the bedroom. I told myself I'd get to them eventually. I set up the couch, the bed, the essentials. I bought a floor lamp from a second-hand shop down the street because the overhead lighting in the living room was too harsh. One of those bare bulbs with no shade that makes everything look like an interrogation room. The floor lamp helped. With it on in the evenings, the place felt almost cozy. Almost. The first strange thing happened on a Friday night. I remember it was Friday because I had ordered food and was sitting on the couch watching something on my laptop. It had started raining sometime around 8. One of those heavy October rains that comes in from nowhere and turns the whole city into a grey, muffled version of itself. I could hear it in the gutters, rushing and urgent. It was the kind of rain that makes you glad to be inside. I was just finishing my food when I heard it. Footsteps from the apartment above me. Now, I want to be clear here, because I know what you are thinking. Footsteps in an apartment building. I'd seen them once, briefly. A shape in the stairwell, tall, with a dark coat. We hadn't spoken. That is normal, too. City living means you share walls and ceilings with people you never really know. But these footsteps were strange for a specific reason. They were slow, deliberately slow. The kind of slow that isn't casual. It is the kind of slow that means someone is paying attention to where they're placing each foot. Step, pause, step, pause. Like they were trying to be quiet, but not quite managing it. Or like they wanted me to hear just enough. The footsteps continued, crossing the room above me. My bedroom, I realized. They crossed from one side to the other, stopped near what I estimated was the far wall. And then there was silence. I waited. Nothing. I turned my show back up and told myself it was nothing. Old building, thin floors, people move around their apartments at night. I had probably paced around my own living room and annoyed whoever lived below me without ever knowing it. That is how it works. I finished my food, went to bed, slept fine, But I thought about those footsteps once or twice over the next few days. Not with fear, just with a vague noticing. The way you notice a word you've never seen before, and then suddenly see it everywhere. The second strange thing happened the following Wednesday. I came home late from work, maybe 10:30 at night. The rain had started again. It rained constantly that October, the kind of month that feels like the city is trying to rinse something away. I came through the front door of the building, shook off my jacket, and started up the stairs. On the third floor landing, I stopped. There was a smell. That same faintly sweet smell from when I'd first arrived, but stronger now. It was coming from the stairwell, or maybe from the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the railing, trying to identify it. It wasn't unpleasant. Exactly. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place. Old flowers, maybe. Or the inside of a closet that has been closed for years. I went upstairs to my apartment, made tea, and forgot about it. The third thing, and this is where I want you to really listen, happened on a Saturday night, 2.5 weeks into my time there. It was raining again, harder than before. I had the floor lamp on, a cup of tea going cold on the coffee table, and I was reading. It was maybe 11 o'clock. The building was completely quiet except for the rain, which was hitting the window in sheets by that point. That deep, relentless rain that makes the whole world feel very far away. I was just starting to feel sleep. The good kind of sleepy, the warm and heavy kind that comes from a quiet evening. I set my book down and sat there for a minute in the lamplight, listening to the rain. And then I realized something. The apartment above me was completely silent. I don't mean normally silent. I mean silent in a way that felt present. The way silence feels in a room. Someone has just stopped talking, like the silence itself was the absence of something that should have been there. I don't know how to explain it better than that. It was the kind of silence that made me aware of being listened to. I sat very still. And then slowly I looked toward the window that faced the street, the window on the 4th floor. There was someone standing outside it. There was no ledge, no fire escape on that side of the building. There was no way for anyone to be standing outside that window, but the shape was there, just a dark shape, roughly the size and proportion of a person, between the glass and the rain. Still, not moving, just there. I didn't move. I don't think I breathed. And then a car went by on the street below, its headlights sweeping up the building for just a second. And in that second, I saw that the window was empty, just rain and glass and the dark street beyond. I turned on every light in the apartment. I checked the locks. I went to bed with the bedroom light on. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, a reflection, a shadow, the particular way rain hits glass and warps what you see. I told myself all of that, and I believed about 40% of it. In the morning, the sun was out for the first time in weeks, and everything felt silly and ordinary. I made coffee and stood at that window and looked out at the street and thought, of course there was nothing there, of course, but I noticed something while I stood there. On the outside of the glass, where the shape had been, there were 2 small smudges round, about the size of fingertips, right at eye level. I closed the blinds and didn't open them again. The next 2 weeks were almost normal. A few more evenings of those slow, deliberate footsteps from above. The smell in the stairwell, coming and going. Once, I thought I heard something outside my front door in the middle of the night. A soft sound, like someone sitting down against it, a shifting. I lay in bed and listened, and told myself it was the building contracting in the cold. But I started leaving a light on at night. The last thing, the thing I genuinely have no explanation for, happened on a Thursday, my 5th week in the apartment. I came home in the late afternoon, and as I came up the stairs, I noticed that the door to apartment 5C, the apartment directly above mine, was slightly open. I had never seen that door open before. I slowed down on the stairs. The door was open maybe 4 inches. From inside came a faint light, not electric, something yellower and more unsteady. Candlelight, maybe. I stood on the landing for a moment. I should have knocked. I should have introduced myself, said hello, done the neighborly thing. Something about the way the door was open. Not carelessly, but precisely, like it had been left that way on purpose. Kept me at the top of the stairs without moving. And then, from inside that apartment, in the silence beneath the rain, I heard something. It took me a moment to understand what it was. Breathing. Long, slow breathing. In and out. In and out. Timed the way you time breath. When you are trying very, very hard not to make a sound. I went downstairs to my apartment, locked the door, and sat in the kitchen with my back to the wall until it got dark. I moved out the following week. I told the landlord it was a job thing, that I was relocating. He didn't ask questions. He didn't seem surprised. He just said he'd mail back my deposit, and then he paused on the phone. Just a half-second pause and said, "Take care of yourself." I've thought about that pause a lot since then. I never found out who lived in 5C. The building directory had the unit listed as vacant. According to the landlord's paperwork, it had been vacant for 8 months. I've never gone back. I don't drive down that street anymore. But sometimes on a rainy night, when the room is quiet and warm, and I am almost asleep, I feel it again. That specific kind of silence. The silence that means something is listening, and I make sure the blinds are closed. Take a breath. You are still here. You are still here. There is something deeply strange about the places we live in. The walls we share with people we never really know. The sounds that travel through floors and ceilings in the dark. We tell ourselves it is all ordinary. Most of the time, we're probably right. Most of the time. Let's settle in for another one. This next story came to me a little differently. It was told to me by a friend who worked nights for about 2 years at a place out in the flatlands, far enough from any city that the nearest streetlight was 15 miles away. She told me once that those 2 years felt longer than the rest of her life combined. I think I understand why now. Story 2, the monitor room. I took the job because the money was good, and because I didn't have a lot of other options. That is the honest version. The version I told people was that I wanted something quiet, something where I could work nights and have my days free. And that was also true, in a way. But the real reason was simpler. It paid nearly twice what I was making at the time. The commute was a straight shot down an empty highway, and they were hiring immediately. The job was at a water treatment facility, a large one. One of those places that sits out in the middle of nowhere because it needs to, because of what it processes and stores, and because the land out there is flat and cheap, and no one wants to build near it anyway. My title was Night Operations Monitor, which was a formal way of saying I sat in a small room full of screens and made sure that a long list of numbers stayed within acceptable ranges for 8 hours. The training took 2 days. The outgoing monitor, a man named Gerald, somewhere in his 60s with the kind of calm that comes either from wisdom or from having given up, walked me through everything with the patience of someone who had explained it many times before. The panels, the logs, the emergency protocols, the radio on the desk that connected to a security line if anything went wrong, the binder full of procedures, so thick it could stop a door. On my last day of training, just before he left, Gerald picked up his thermos from the desk and stood by the door for a moment. "This place is quiet," he said. "That is the main thing. It is just quiet. Don't let it get to you." I thanked him, and he left, and I sat down at the desk for my first solo shift. He was right about the quiet. The facility sat on about 40 acres of flat land, and was surrounded on all sides by fields. Soybeans. Mostly, I think, though in the dark they were just flatness, just the absence of features stretching out in every direction. The access road was 2 miles of straight gravel that met a county highway you could drive for 20 minutes without seeing another car. The nearest town was 18 miles east. From inside the monitor room, you couldn't see any of that. The monitor room was in the center of the main building, a windowless space about the size of a large walk-in closet, packed with equipment and lit by the blue-white glow of 6 screens. The screens showed data, mostly charts and numbers, and flow rates, pressure readings. 2 of them showed camera feeds, one from the front gate, one from the main processing floor. Both feeds were dark most of the night, lit only by the facility's motion, activated exterior lights. The sounds of the facility became familiar quickly. The hum of the pumps, constant and low, like the building breathing. The occasional click of a relay switching somewhere in the building. The quiet whir of the ventilation. These sounds became the background noise of my nights. And within a week, I had stopped hearing them consciously, the same way you stop hearing a refrigerator running. What I noticed more, over time, was the silence around those sounds. The silence of the fields, and the road in the flat black distance. On a clear night, that silence felt enormous. Like the building was a small bright point in the middle of an infinite dark nothing. On cloudy nights, which were more common, it felt closer, closer and heavier. I worked Sunday through Thursday. I started at 10 p.m. and finished at 6 a.m. In the beginning, I brought things to keep me busy, books, podcasts, a notebook I used for sketching. But the screens needed enough attention that I couldn't fully tune out, and over time the things I brought stayed in my bag more often than not, and I found myself just sitting and watching the numbers and listening to the facility hum. It wasn't unpleasant. Gerald had been right. The quiet was the main thing, and once you accepted it, there was something almost meditative about those long, still nights. The first strange thing happened about 6 weeks in, on a Tuesday night in early November. I was about 3 hours into my shift, the facility running normally, nothing requiring any attention. I was reading one of the few nights I actually got through several chapters, when I noticed that the camera feed on monitor 5, the one showing the processing floor, had changed. Not drastically. The room was the same room, lit the same way by the same low overnight lighting. The equipment was where it always was. But something in the upper right corner of the frame was different. A shadow, or what looked like a shadow, in a place where shadows didn't usually fall. I leaned forward and looked at it for a long time. It was probably nothing. It was probably a shift in the way the camera was aimed. Sometimes the motion of the building's ventilation system was enough to move a camera mount slightly. It was probably that. But the shadow was shaped like a person. Roughly, vaguely, the way a shadow looks when it belongs to someone standing just outside the frame. I watched the screen for about 20 minutes. The shadow didn't move. Then the ventilation clicked on, and in the vibration the camera shifted slightly, and the shadow was gone. I logged a note about the camera mount and went back to my book. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday, I heard something. I want to describe this carefully, because the description matters. It wasn't a loud sound. It wasn't a bang or a crash or anything that would make you jump. It was a soft sound coming from somewhere in the building behind me, from the direction of the corridor that led from the monitor room to the main floor. It was a sound like a door easing shut, the soft, pneumatic settling of a heavy door that had been carefully, gently pulled closed. I turned around. The corridor behind me was empty and dark, lit only at the far end by the green glow of an exit sign. The doors in this building were all on pneumatic closes. They didn't slam. They settled, and they were heavy enough that a temperature change or pressure shift could theoretically move one slightly. That was the explanation I reached for, and I reached for it quickly, because I was alone in a building 18 miles from the nearest town, and it was 2 in the morning. I turned back to my screens. For the rest of that shift, I sat with my back very straight and very still, and I didn't put my headphones in. The thing I found difficult to explain, and still find difficult to explain. Over the following months, there were nights when the facility felt perfectly ordinary. Calm and functional and boring in the best possible way. And then there were other nights, scattered among the calm ones, when something felt different, not wrong exactly, just different. The hum of the pumps would seem to change pitch for a while. The camera feed on the processing floor would show something that wasn't quite right for a few minutes before resolving back to normal. The corridor behind me would feel, without any rational basis, like it was not empty. On those nights I sat very still and watched my screens and waited for 6 a.m. I never saw anything clearly, that is important to say. I never saw a figure, never heard a voice, never had an experience that I could point to and say, that exact thing, that is what I can't explain. It was always at the edges, always almost. The shape on the monitor that might have been a door, the feeling of a corridor that might not have been empty. But there was one night, one specific night, about a year into the job, that was different from the others. It was February, cold enough that the fields around the building were frozen flat, and the access road was sheeted with ice that I'd had to creep over at 15 miles an hour just to get in. The facility was quieter than usual, something about the cold affecting the pump acoustics. I was told later, the hum was lower, almost subsonic. The kind of sound you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. I was 3 hours from the end of my shift when the camera on the processing floor went dark, not off. The feed was still live, the signal still active, just dark, as though something very close to the camera lens was blocking the light. I switched to the backup feed for that camera. Same thing, dark. I called the security line and reported it. They told me it was probably a sensor issue, that maintenance would look at it in the morning and to log it. I know it was 11 minutes because I was watching the clock. And then the feed came back just as suddenly as it had gone. The processing floor lit the same as always, empty, everything where it should be. Except for one thing, on the floor directly below where the camera was mounted. The camera on the ceiling at the far end of the room. There were 2 footprints, wet footprints, dark against the concrete floor. Side by side, facing the camera, like someone had been standing there, looking up. The footprints were dry by the time the morning crew came in. I showed them the camera log. They watched the 11 minutes of darkness, and then the footprints reappearing, and they were quiet for a moment, and then someone said it was probably a condensation issue, and they all agreed that was probably it. I handed in my notice the following week. I've worked 3 jobs since then, all of them in offices with other people around during normal business hours. I sleep well, mostly. I don't have nightmares about the facility. But sometimes when I am in a room with a camera, and there are cameras everywhere now, in offices and lobbies and shops, I find myself thinking about those footprints, about whatever it was that had been standing in that room, looking up at the lens, about what it was doing during those 11 minutes of darkness, about whether it had been there before, on all those other nights, just outside the frame, and about whether it had been watching me the way I thought I was watching it, still with me. Good. There is something about isolation that changes things. The way your mind works when you are completely alone, when there is no one to look at and confirm that what you are seeing is real. We need that sometimes, that second set of eyes. Without it, everything becomes possible. The last story tonight takes us outside, away from walls and roofs and locked doors, out into the trees where the dark is a different kind of dark entirely. This one was told to me in pieces, over the course of several conversations, by someone I've known for a long time. He went on that trip alone because he needed to get away from everything, from everyone. He found the quiet he was looking for. Take a slow breath. Here is the last story, story 3. Something in the pines. I've been camping alone dozens of times. I want you to know that before I tell you this, I am not someone who spooks easily. I am not someone who imagines things in the dark. I grew up in a rural area. I spent my teens and 20s in the woods at every opportunity. And I've slept under the stars in places most people have never heard of. The dark has never frightened me. So when I say that what happened on that trip frightened me in a way, I've never been frightened before or since. I need you to understand that those words are not being used lightly. This was 3 years ago, late September. A place in the National Forest in northern Washington. I'll leave the exact location vague, not to be mysterious, but because I genuinely don't want anyone to go looking. The area I was heading to was about a 12-mile hike from the nearest trailhead, off a fire road that most people never turned onto because it looked like it led to nothing, which it mostly did until you got to the end of it and found a trail marker, half hidden by a pine that had grown up around it, pointing into the trees. I'd been to this spot once before, a small clearing next to a creek ringed by old-growth pine on 3 sides and a gentle rise on the 4th. The kind of place that feels discovered rather than made, like the forest arranged itself specifically for someone to sleep there. The creek was cold and clear enough to drink from if you filtered it. There was a natural windbreak from the pines. It was perfect. I got to the clearing around 4 in the afternoon on a Friday. Having left my car at the fire road before dawn and hiked through the day. The weather was clear and cold, the kind of late September cold that bites at your ears and fingertips. The trees were just beginning to turn. Not the spectacular color of October, but that early suggestion of change, a few edges going gold and copper, while the rest held on to green. I set up my tent, got a small fire going with the wood I'd carried in, and sat there eating a hot meal as the light went down. The sky cleared completely as the sun dropped, and the stars came out, more than you ever see from a city, more than you can count. The creek made its quiet sound. The pines made their sound, that slow, deep breath that old trees make in a light wind, like they're just barely awake. I felt completely at peace. I mentioned that specifically because of what came after. The first night was perfect. Woke up at first light to frost on the tent fly and the creek running silver in the early sun, and a raven calling from somewhere in the trees. I made coffee on my camp stove, ate slowly, and sat by the dead fire watching the morning open up around me. The second day was for hiking. I went north along the creek for a few miles, into a section of the forest I'd never been to. Old trees, massive, some of them with circumferences wider than my arm span. The undergrowth was sparse in their shade, just pine needles and old fallen wood, and the occasional fern finding a gap in the canopy. The light came down in long shafts. It was beautiful and still in the way that places are beautiful and still when humans almost never go there. I turned around at a ridge and was back at my camp by early afternoon. Spent the rest of the day reading and restoring. Made dinner, put the food bag up in a tree the way you are supposed to, and was in my sleeping bag by 9. That is when the second night began. I fell asleep quickly but woke sometime later. I checked my watch and it was just past 1 in the morning. The temperature had dropped. I could hear the wind moving through the tops of the pines, a sound like ocean surf, distant and rhythmic. The creek was its quiet self. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened and tried to identify what had woken me. Nothing. I couldn't point to anything specific. It was just the faint, vague feeling that something in the environment had changed. The way an animal sometimes lifts its head before a storm, before the storm is close enough to feel. As if there is some other signal, atmospheric, electromagnetic, something we don't have a name for, that arrives first. I listened for a while and heard nothing but the wind and the creek. I closed my eyes and fell back asleep. What woke me the second time was not a feeling. It was a sound. I lay absolutely still. The sound came again. It was coming from the tree line, from somewhere in the pines to the north of the clearing, the direction I had hiked that day. A sound like something stepping very carefully over dry wood. The particular sound of a foot coming down slowly, testing the ground, then settling into it. Not frequent. Once, then silence. The pace of something moving with great deliberation. I told myself, dear, black bears were possible out there too, though September was not their most active month. Any number of large animals move through forests at night, and any of them could produce exactly that sound. I lay still and listened and did not reach for my flashlight, because flashlights in tents look like lanterns from outside. The sound stopped. I waited, maybe 10, and it came again. Not dramatically closer, maybe 30 feet rather than 50. But closer, and now I could hear something else within it. A kind of rhythm. The stepping wasn't random, wasn't the wandering movement of an animal grazing or crossing through. It was back and forth. A few steps in one direction, a pause, a few steps back, then the pause again, like something pacing, like something that had stopped at the edge of the clearing and was deciding. I reached very slowly for my bear spray, which I kept in a pocket in the tent door, and I unzipped that pocket as quietly as I could. The zipper sounded, in that silence, like a shout. The stepping stopped instantly. Complete silence, except for the wind in the tops of the trees, which had nothing to do with what was in the clearing. I waited. I am not sure how long I waited. Time does strange things when your heart is moving like that, and you are lying very still in the dark. It might have been 15 minutes. It might have been 45. At some point I fell asleep again, because the next thing I remember is dawn, grey and cold through the tent fabric, and the sound of the creek, and nothing else. I got out of the tent slowly and looked around the clearing. Nothing out of the ordinary. No tracks visible in the pine needle floor, which was too dry and springy to hold impressions. My food bag was still hanging where I'd left it. Nothing had been disturbed. I told myself animal. I believed it mostly. I had planned to stay 3 nights and hike out on Monday morning. By midday Saturday, after a careful and honest conversation with myself, I decided I would stay, not because I wasn't rattled, but because I had hiked 12 miles to be there, and I refused to let one strange night chase me out. I was experienced. I had bear spray. I had a whistle and a knife and a fully charged satellite communicator. I was fine. I spent the day doing nothing in particular, reading, sitting by the creek, watching clouds build from the west, which I didn't love. The forecast had shown a possibility of rain by Sunday, but I had good rain gear and my tent was well sealed. I made a bigger fire that night, cooked a proper meal, Saturday up later than I had the night before, until the fire was just coals, watching the clearing and the tree line and the sky, which had clouded over and now showed no stars. I was just about to go to bed when I heard it again. The same sound from the same direction, that careful, deliberate stepping in the trees to the north. I sat absolutely still by the fire, and then the stepping stopped, and something else happened that I have spent 3 years trying to explain away. From somewhere in the trees, not close, maybe 80 or 100 feet, there was a sound like breathing. Long, slow, deep inhale. Exhale, inhale, exhale. Too slow for a human at rest, and much too slow for an animal that had been moving. The rhythm of something that was completely calm. I stood up. I had my bear spray in my hand. The breathing continued for a moment, then stopped, and then from a completely different direction, from the tree line to the east, behind my tent, not the north, where the stepping had come from. Something moved, not careful this time. A single, heavy shift, the sound of weight moving in underbrush. Low to the ground, maybe knee-height. They weren't bright, not the reflective eye-shine of an animal caught in a flashlight beam. They were dim, a dull amber color, like embers that had almost gone out. I raised my flashlight. The trees were empty. Nothing there, just pines and darkness, and the first drops of rain beginning to fall. I got into my tent and zipped it all the way. I did not sleep at some point in the middle of the night. The rain arrived in full heavy, drumming on the tent, filling the air with that close damp sound that rain makes in a forest. I lay on my back and listened to it and told myself, this is good. Rain masks sound. If something was out there, the rain would discourage it. Animals don't like heavy rain, but I wasn't thinking about animals by then. I was thinking about the breathing, about the way it had been calm, about the way whatever was to the north and whatever was to the east had seemed, in those seconds, to be coordinated, like one was meant to be heard and one was meant to be seen, like I was being approached from two sides simultaneously. I hiked out the next morning, as soon as it was light enough to see the trail. 12 miles in the rain, which I had sworn to myself I would never do. I was back at my car by early afternoon, and I sat in it with the heat running and the rain on the roof, and I just sat there for a while. I've tried to make sense of it in the years since. I've done what you do. I've researched, I've asked people who know those forests. Mountain lions are in that area, though rarely seen. Black bears, of course. There are a handful of other things that could explain most of it most of the time. But I keep coming back to the breathing, to how calm it was, to the fact that it came from the north, and then the sound in the east, and the way those 2 points of amber light were low and steady and watching. And I keep coming back to something I noticed as I was breaking down camp in the rain that morning. Something I almost didn't notice because I was moving quickly and the rain was heavy. On the tree at the edge of the clearing to the north, the last tree before the forest thickened, 3 of them at a height of about 6 feet. Not slash marks, not claw marks. Something smoother than that. Like 3 fingers had been dragged slowly downward through the bark. Old marks, not fresh, like whatever it was had been here before. Like it knew this clearing. Like it had been waiting a long time for someone to come back. Stay there for a moment. Don't move just yet. Take a breath. Listen to whatever room you are in right now. The sounds it makes, the small creaks and the quiet. There is something I've been thinking about. Sitting with these 3 stories about the apartment and the window. About the monitor room and the footprints on the floor. About the clearing in the pines and what was waiting there in the dark. The common thread isn't the horror, it is the not knowing. It is the way each of these stories ends without a clean answer, without a resolution that lets you put it away in a box labeled explained. And close the lid. That is the thing about the world. Really about it, I mean. Not the world we talk about at breakfast or at work. The other world. The one that exists in the space between what we know and what we can prove. The one that lives in the corners of rooms at 2 in the morning, and in corridors that feel occupied, and in the tree line at the edge of a firelit clearing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave evidence that holds up in daylight. It exists in that narrow band of experience that is just outside your peripheral vision, just below the threshold of certainty. And I've come to be careful here. I want to say this exactly right. Not as a failure of understanding, but as an honest acknowledgement of something true. Some things don't have explanations. Some presences don't have names. Some doors, once noticed, can't be unnoticed. You've been with me for a while tonight. You've come a long way from wherever you started. In a few minutes, you can close your eyes, if you haven't already. You can let the sounds of wherever you are become just sounds again. Just the ordinary music of a late night in a world mostly asleep. But before you do, I want to leave you with one thought. Somewhere right now, not far, maybe closer than you'd like, something is being very quiet. Something is being very, very still. Not because it is asleep, because it is listening, just like you were.